Hello everyone, good evening. I'm Shreya Dhondia. As we speak, the US-led NATO has mobilized warships, fighter planes and ground troops in Eastern Europe as clouds of war loom large on the Ukrainian border. Russia's military buildup on Ukraine's border is already warlike, pretty similar to what we saw in 2014 when Russia annexed Ukraine's southern Crimean peninsula. Russia says all talks of an invasion right now are Western hysteria, but America says it can happen any time. The long list of demands that Kremlin has given NATO have already been dismissed as non-starters. So the question is a war coming to Europe? No one can be sure, but what is clear is that Vladimir Putin is trying to recreate the Russian sphere of influence it lost with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Can he do it, is the question. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is your debrief this evening. CNN's Nick Robertson is joining us from Moscow with all the latest updates as the story develops. But let's start with what Moscow is demanding. A long list, really. Putin wants a commitment that Ukraine and former Soviet states will not be added to NATO, and that NATO, that he sees as an anti-Russian military alliance, will withdraw from Eastern Europe. Stepping up the pressure, Putin is saying he has this week to hear back from NATO allies before he can take a final call on what he wants to do in Ukraine. Take a look. Picture this. 1.27 lakh Russian troops stationed right at the Ukrainian border waiting for an order to invade. On the other hand, NATO allies sending planes and ships in response. No, this is not the script of a war film. This is the ground reality at the Russia-Ukraine border. As talks between Russia and the US hit a roadblock, Putin's troops have been upping the ante, conducting quote-unquote military drills in the region. US intelligence says the invasion of Ukraine is imminent, something Russia is denying. The US and UK have withdrawn non-essential staff from their embassies in Ukraine as the threat of war looms over Europe. America is also sending out a warning.
If a single additional Russian force goes into Ukraine in an aggressive way, as I said, that would trigger a swift, a severe, and a united response from us and from Europe. And again, there are other things that Russia could do that fall short of actually sending additional forces into Ukraine. And again, across the board, we're prepared with Europe for a swift and calibrated and very united response.
Here is where the plot thickens. Russia has outright denied plans to invade Ukraine, but looks like the border buildup is just a Trojan horse. UK has revealed that Russia is plotting a coup and plans to install a pro-Moscow Ukrainian head of state. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs is calling these reports disinformation and is urging the UK to stop spreading nonsense. What has led to this crisis? Well, Ukraine is sandwiched between Russia and Europe. The conflict between Ukraine, a former Soviet republic, and Russia dates back to 2013. But the current tensions are over Ukraine joining the NATO alliance. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was established in 1949 to counter Soviet aggression. Russia fears that Ukraine joining NATO would bring allied forces right to its doorstep.
We had deterrence for 4 years. Vladimir Putin didn't do these kinds of things. He didn't threaten. He didn't use coercive activity to try to push back on NATO in the way he did. We made sure NATO was focused on its mission. And when we did that, Vladimir Putin respected us. We had respect for him and his power. He's a very talented statesman.
It's a wait-and-watch game now. The signals are more than clear. After annexing Crimea in 2014 and sponsoring separatist movements in the Donbass in the country's east, Moscow is directly threatening a third incursion into Ukraine's territorial sovereignty. Why? Well, because Russia considers Ukraine part of its empire and not a separate sovereign state. Plus, Vladimir Putin has pretty much gotten away with everything he has done so far. With the world's eyes on it, what will Russia do? Is Putin bluffing? Is the main aim to get America to drop sanctions against it? Is it to stop Ukraine's entry into NATO? Or is the end game an invasion of Ukraine? With Natasha Menden in New Delhi, I'm Shreya Dhondia. I'm going straight across to Nick Robertson, who's CNN's international diplomatic editor. He's joining us from Moscow this evening. Nick, the question remains, is a conflict imminent?
Russia is saying it has no intention to invade Ukraine, but that it continues to build up its military forces. It has a presence to the south in Crimea. It has a presence to the east in Russia, and it's building a presence in the north, where it just brought in sophisticated surface-to-air missiles for military exercises in Belarus, where there could be 100,000 additional troops. So the possibility, the potential is there. President Biden says he thinks it's going to happen. Is it imminent? Now we have both the British and the US withdrawing non-essential staff and their embassies in Kiev. So the writing, the diplomatic writing is there, if you will. The military writing is there that it's possible. But I think really only one person knows, and that's President Putin. And at the moment, all indications from the Kremlin are he's not about to invade. So outside of that, it's very hard to read.
Okay, Nick, I want you to stay with us because NATO is sending in reinforcements to Western Europe as we speak. Kremlin is saying it is the West and not Russia that is escalating tensions. Ukraine, that is sandwiched between Russia and the European Union geographically, is upgrading its navy as these tensions grow. Russia has announced sweeping naval drills involving 140 warships and 60 aircraft. Snap military drills have also been announced with Belarus, which shares a border with Ukraine. The posture is as offensive as it can get, despite what Russia is saying. Ukraine's navy, meanwhile, is upgrading itself to meet the challenge. Take a look.
On patrol in some of the most contested waters in the world, Ukraine's Navy took us on an artillery boat in the Sea of Azov, just as tensions with Russia have reached a boiling point. Our main goal is to defend and keep the sovereignty of Ukraine from the direction of the sea, the captain tells me. Russia has been massing troops near Ukraine's borders, the U.S. says, warning its allies a large-scale invasion could happen soon. The Ukrainians believe that if Russia does decide to launch an attack, that the Sea of Azov could be one of the main battlegrounds. That's why the Ukrainians are both modernizing their fleet, but also their infrastructure on land as well. The Azov coastline holds a strategic value to Russia. It would allow President Vladimir Putin to establish a much-sought land corridor to connect Russia to annexed Crimea. Ukraine's defense ministry gave us rare access to the massive construction going on at the Berdyansk naval base. Kiev has now ordered this building program to urgently be accelerated, with the Russian threat looming large. In order to complete this project as quick as possible, the Ukrainian military tells us they are now working 7 days a week. And they say once it's finished, it will offer a formidable deterrent against any Russian aggression. Upgrades seem badly needed here, with much of Berdyansk's port in utter disrepair. Ukraine says new facilities will allow them to base more and bigger ships here. We are ready, this officer says. That is why we are here, so that at any time, if there is any aggression in the Azov Sea, we can resist it. Ukraine's president says Russia has positioned close to 100,000 troops near its borders, which the Kremlin denies. These satellite images appearing to show dozens of military vehicles near Yelnya in southwestern Russia. The Biden administration has warned Moscow not to attack and is mulling more weapons deliveries to Kiev. CNN has learned one U.S. defense official says Russia's aim may be to create confusion or to get concessions. The Kremlin dismissed talk of a possible invasion as hysteria. Ukraine's armed forces say they are on constant alert, preparing for an armed confrontation they hope can be avoided.
Nick, you continue to join us from Russia. I want to ask you, what is the European Union stand, given that 43% of their oil supplies come from Russia via Ukraine? Now, Russia likes to portray itself as a reliable energy supplier, but in a sanctions war, the energy gloves might just come off.
Yeah, those gas supplies are hugely important, and there's certainly a consideration for European nations while they're considering what sort of sanctions to put on Russia. 15% of those gas supplies that come to Europe come through directly through Ukraine as well. So there could be an impact on that part of the flow if there was a conflict in Ukraine. Plus, Russia could choose to throttle back that other 40+% of gas supplies to Europe as a as a diplomatic tool. And that is a concern. So how would Europe ramp up and find alternate energy supplies? Already the United States is reaching out to partners in the Gulf. It's been talking to the Qataris about possibly finding additional gas supplies to come from there. The United States has been rerouting some of its own gas supplies towards Europe. There's, most energy experts think that there would be a hiccup in energy supplies to Europe if there was an invasion of Ukraine, and if Russia decided to unilaterally throttle back even more the supplies to Europe, that there would be a hiccup, but then that would be overcome in a matter of time. But already European nations are facing huge price hikes in gas supplies. So it's also a difficult political issue for many European capitals to decide, okay, if we put on strict sanctions on Russia, are they going to impose energy costs on us, and how's that going to settle politically with our populations, who are not happy about the price hikes they see at the moment? So none of this is easy, but what has been said very clearly from the European Union, any invasion of Ukraine is going to bring swift, strong economic and financial sanctions on Russia. And we heard that from the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen just over the weekend. So there's no doubt from Europe that Russia would face a high cost of invasion, but how they would respond to that is not clear.
And how high is this cost is the question, of course, as well, because if the European Union doesn't buy, say, oil and energy from Russia, there's always China. There's a huge market there. The Russians will be happy to sell it to China. Now, Nick, lastly, there are some intel reports from the US and UK that indicate that Russia is trying to install their own man in Kiev. Who is he, and how is Russia responding to that accusation?
Yevgeny Murayev is the one the British Foreign Office said that was the person that Russia was thinking, the pro-Russian politician that Russia was thinking of installing as a leader in Ukraine. CNN's contacted him, and he said essentially, why would they pick me? I'm under sanctions from Russia. This is what he's said publicly. So he's discounting himself as being the person that Russia would pick. The British also pointed to a former prime minister, two former deputy prime ministers, a former national security member of the parliament in Ukraine, who they said had been talking to Russian intelligence operatives who the British say are currently involved in planning an invasion of Ukraine. So I think what is happening here is that both the United States and the UK are trying to signal to President Putin that they see that he is considering these destabilizing efforts and influences to try to sort of flush them out at a public level, to put into the public domain discussion about it, to dissuade President Putin, but also to signal to him that potentially, given in the case of Yevgeny Murayev, that this candidate has very, very low political support, couldn't even make it into the presidential elections in Ukraine a couple of years ago. And that, so perhaps for President Putin, the people that his intelligence services are offering up to flag to him by putting this information in the public domain that maybe these people are not the best picks and that his intelligence services are not giving him the best information. This is a very murky business when you get into the situation of espionage. For all we know, the Kremlin could have leaked this information to find out who's leaking information within the close circles of the Kremlin. So it's impossible really to second guess these scenarios accurately. But the stated intent, as we understand it from the British and the Americans, is to signal to President Putin that they are watching, that there's going to be a high political and economic cost for him if he invades Ukraine and if he tries to destabilize. Beyond that, it's very hard to read the situation accurately.
All right, we leave it there for the moment. So it's a wait and watch situation. Nick Robertson is what you're telling us. Good to chat. We'll keep coming back to you as the story develops and the tensions escalate between Russia and Ukraine. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, to better understand tensions between NATO and Russia over Ukraine, it's worth a glance at history and a good look at a map. Journalist, broadcaster and writer Tim Marshall is explaining the geopolitics, the geography and the history that motivates Vladimir Putin's aggression on Ukraine. Take a look.
To better understand the tensions between NATO and Russia over Ukraine, it's worth a glance at history and a good look at a map. In the Cold War, Europe was split more or less in two. The NATO countries in the west, Warsaw Pact under Moscow's dominance in the east. But post-Cold War, country after country wanted to join NATO, and it's moved up to Russia's borders. To understand why Russia feels nervous about that, a topographical map is useful. There's a mountain range running across Europe, the Carpathian Mountains. Now, from the Baltic Sea here to where the Carpathians start there, this is flat ground. And through that flat ground have come Napoleon and the French, Hitler and the Germans, and many others who've invaded Russia from that direction. And that makes Russia very nervous. Therefore, it seeks to either plug that gap by occupying it, or if not, where the ground opens up into flat ground, it wants to, at the very least, dominate it. In 2014, its reaction was to occupy and then annex Crimea, part of Ukraine, and its warm water port of Sebastopol, which gives the Russian fleet access out of the Black Sea into the Mediterranean, and from there onto the great ocean lanes of the world. It also fomented civil war in the Donbass region in order to create a small mini buffer zone. Now, Putin seems to be more ambitious. Now, if there's going to be an invasion, one of the four scenarios will probably come to pass. Fully occupy and annex the Donbass region. Up from that, move up from the Crimea and join all this territory up, so your buffer zone is bigger. One level up from that, race along the Black Sea coast all the way to Odessa, which is a Russian-speaking city. Annex the whole of the coastline and cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. And most ambitious of all, you do all the preceding scenarios and you move troops into Belarus, which is friendly to Russia, and you come down from Belarus through what are called the Pripyat marshes, which are frozen in winter, and you encircle the capital of Ukraine called Kiev. The best time to do it is winter, because it's going to be a mechanized advance, and the mechanized divisions need hard frozen ground. That's strategy. But it's important to understand the place that Ukraine has in Russia's hearts, or in its psychology. Russian culture began in Kiev, and it's where what eventually became Russia was founded. I mean, it moved eastwards across to Moscow, but they still know in their collective imagination that the root of their culture is in the heart of Ukraine. Large parts of the country are Russian-speaking. There's the Slavic connection, and there's also the fact that many people are Russian Orthodox in their religious belief. This is from the heart, and it actually does play a role in Russian thinking.
It's a story we continue to track right here on Debrief, but for the moment we are taking a very quick break. Up next, China is upping the ante in Taiwan. It has sent 39 fighters into Taiwan's airspace, and the Houthis are upping their missile strikes against the UAE. Both those stories coming up next. Do stay with us. Tensions brewing in two other parts of the world. The United Arab Emirates, that's the UAE, today intercepted and destroyed two Houthi missiles that were fired from Yemen. Take a look. These are the pictures that have been released by the UAE Defense Ministry. This is coming a week after a deadly attack on Abu Dhabi, where a fuel port was hit, causing a fire near the international airport. 3 people were killed in that attack. In this attack, given that the missile was intercepted well in time, there have been no casualties. For more than 6 years, the Houthis have been battling a Saudi-led coalition that includes the UAE, repeatedly carrying out cross-border missile and drone attacks on Saudi Arabia. Now, January 17th was the first time that the UAE was attacked. A day after that, the coalition conducted an airstrike on Sana'a, the rebel stronghold in Yemen, that killed 11 people. Then there was an airstrike in a jail in Yemen where more than 80 people were killed. What we saw today, the missiles being fired by the Houthis that we saw today, was in retaliation to that. Thankfully, for the UAE, they were intercepted well in time. These pictures that you see on your screens, released by the Ministry of Defense of the UAE.